Hello, my name is Liam Phelps, and the topic I chose is oralism in schools and the effect it has on deaf children. Here is my project. It depicts a deaf student in a hearing school. The student looks towards the teacher but isn't learning anything. First, I will talk about the history of deaf schools, then I will talk about the present-day oralism in schools. In very early history, many people believed that deaf people are incapable of being taught. An example of that is Aristotle. He thought that deaf people lacked reason and therefore could not learn. But it was during the 1500s that people realized that they could in fact learn, and that led to the establishment of schools for deaf students. Since technology that enabled deaf people to hear did not exist, language was usually taught using manual alphabets or signs, often with efforts to teach speech through visual means, using speech reading, gestures, pictures, and objects. In 1817, the first formal school of the deaf was established in Connecticut called the American Asylum of the Education and Institution for Deaf and Dumb Persons. At first, schools for the deaf used sign language, but as time went on, arguments were made on whether or not to use sign or spoken language. In 1880, the International Deaf Education Conference in Italy voted to ban the use of sign language in schools. Throughout Europe and the United States, sign language was banned and oralism was adopted in schools for the deaf. By the end of the 1800s, a philosophy was believed that sign language was a primitive language and spoken language was far superior. Following that, public debates ensued by M.T. Gallant and Alexander Graham Bell. A compromise was made and a compiled approach of both spoken language and signing. It wasn't until the 1970s, in the wake of the Civil Rights era, that academics and educators once again recognized sign language as a critical educational tool and as a language equal to others. In recent history, there has been a great advancement in society's understanding of the deaf experience, such as multilingualism and bilingualism. But we still have a long way to go. The belief that speaking is superior to signing is still prevalent today. From the blog, oralism is the huge, entirely avoidable barrier that deaf people are forced to face by Akil Haji. She says that immense amount of deaf potential is hidden because of communication barriers. She shares her story of the hardship she's faced because of oralism in both deaf schools and hearing schools. To quote, the dominance of oralism means that, for instance, schools enforce hearing aids on younger deaf children and force them to learn by speaking. This approach to education is a huge barrier that I and countless other deaf people have personally experienced. I went to a deaf school where we had to try to listen to the teacher speaking, write down answers, and then learn. This is not an effective method at all, as we are forced to lip read the instructions. And in hearing school, she said that for classes, I did not understand anything we were being taught. I coped with it by copying everything from the classmate who sat next to me, and having my family explain everything to me after I got home. End quote. As we can see from society's historical perspective of deaf people, there is much that needs to be done in order to be able to be more accessible to and improve the quality of education for deaf people. That's it. And for questions for the class, the three questions are: what can be done to lessen the divide between deaf people and hearing students? What resources can schools provide to make a more accessible learning environment for deaf students? And how can hearing students be more considerate to their deaf classmates? Thank you. Bye bye.